Hi Kent.
George, how are you, mate?
Fine, thanks. Look, I was looking at your last video and you came up with some rather interesting issues there. The first thing you notice about the video is that there are problems along the business cycle in both boom periods and recessions. And the initial problem seemed to be one that was associated with unemployment. So what seems to happen is that as an economy, as the spending goes down in the economy, so businesses tend to lay off workers and you get unemployment.
Cyclical unemployment.
Cyclical unemployment. Okay. So why? Just outline quickly why unemployment is a problem.
The obvious social effects, if you like, there's loss of confidence, loss of self-esteem, increased drug abuse, alcohol abuse, family breakups, stress, anxiety, etc., etc.
And all the social payments that have to be made in order to...
an additional burden on the government because of our social security system in Australia. So
and of the health system.
Opportunity cost, and exactly, and increased crime rate is also associated with rising levels of unemployment. So it's a nasty, it's undesirable, and of course from a purely macroeconomic viewpoint, we're operating inside our PPF.
Exactly.
So we're not achieving that level of output we could be achieving if we weren't suffering from unemployment.
All right, exactly. All right. So now, but cyclical unemployment isn't the only kind of unemployment, is it?
No. There's two others. There's a labour market dynamic, if you like, which is there's a normal transitioning of people between jobs, and that in between thing we get the word friction. We call it frictional unemployment, and it's voluntary. We regard it as being actually quite a good thing, because clearly if people are voluntarily quitting their job anticipating getting another, they must be perceiving there's some strength in the economy. So most economists regard that as being quite a desirable thing.
So vacancies, there are vacancies for the people who are unemployed. But they just haven't taken up those positions.
No, correct. Yeah. The real thorny problem with respect to unemployment is what we call structural unemployment, where there's a whole host of examples of this. We sometimes refer to it as a mismatch of skills, where people's skill sets have been rendered technologically obsolete, or we get that fairly dramatic the closure of plants, e.g. Ford Motor Company closing in Geelong. You get BHP closing the steel mills in Newcastle. So whole generations of people whose welfare was dependent upon the income generated from working in those plants ceases to exist. So they feel structurally dislocated, basically. So, and of course, if they don't get a job fairly quickly, they can slip into a mindset of being dependent on social security, and they lose their job skills. And they slip into that subset we call long-term unemployed, which is another generational thing. It's a really big problem for governments to address. Because you're actually they're requiring a reskilling.
Exactly.
And whose job is it to reskill these people?
Yeah, and some of the reskilling may be just changing people's attitudes to work. I mean, there are generations of families who've never had a job. And therefore, that becomes a really intractable issue, very difficult in a modern society to get rid of.
It is, and look, what we're actually saying is that there's a chunk of people, a fairly big chunk, in the hundreds of thousands of people, and they're unemployable. Effectively unemployable. So you can't put square pegs in round holes, or vice versa.
Yes, that's right.
Well, you can, but it's not very efficient. And it's not satisfactory for either the person being employed or the employer. So it is a problem.
So now, from a policy point of view, it's quite clear that demand deficient unemployment, cyclical unemployment, is something that is manageable through demand management policy.
Yep.
However, these other two, it's not appropriate to demand manage structural and frictional unemployment. So we have to be clear that fiscal and monetary policy are really only applicable to cyclical unemployment.
And that's true. And what it leads us economists to conclude is that when cyclical unemployment is zero,
Yes.
we're effectively at what you and I would call full
Full
employment.
employment.
Because
Yes,
all
yes,
that's
yes,
left,
yes.
all that's left is some frictional and structural.
And structural.
And
yes.
so what we're actually saying is that there's a natural rate of unemployment,
It's called
the
that,
NRU,
the NRU,
that
yeah.
exists when cyclical is zero. There is still a chunk of people.
Yes.
We don't quite know how big it is. We can't quantify it. We guess it's between, say, 4.5% to maybe 5% unemployment. So
Yes.
it's a rather interesting notion to try and sell the idea that full employment occurs when Australia's at 4.5% unemployment.
Exactly.
It's
so it's not 100% employment.
No, and
Yeah.
it poses obviously some problems for policymakers.
Policymakers.
So if you get it wrong,
Yeah.
and you're trying to stimulate economic activity
Exactly.
to eliminate cyclical
Exactly.
unemployment,
Exactly.
you can actually surge beyond there and create more inflation.
Yes. So in the real world, it's often difficult to identify when the economy is at full employment.
It is.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that is simply a fact.